Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-magazine of the Futures Forum, and we're live online. It is March 2020 and we're celebrating Women's History Month with an exploration into the future history of women 2030 and beyond. Now, why 2030? Well, the UN has given us 17 Sustainable Development Goals that all countries should aspire to by 2030. And goal number 5 speaks specifically to the development and inclusion of women. This year's hashtag, as we know, is Each for Equal. Hashtag Each for Equal. But what might this mean? What might we expect of the future history of women? And so, in this segment, I will be speaking to Dr.Codou Diaw. And she will, am I correct?
Yes.
Aha! Dr.Codou Diaw is currently a program lead for the East African Partner Network at the Mastercard Foundation Scholars Program. She oversees partnerships with several higher and secondary education institutions in the East African region and manages initiatives that help transition these students into employment, entrepreneurship, and other tech work training. Now, what is also very interesting, that she has a background in supporting Pan-Africanism in the NGO movement across Africa. She has done work with UNESCO and the other alphabetical soup of organizations. She has lived all over the world, so she brings a very cosmopolitan lens to her work in terms of what she's doing. She's on the advisory board of many organizations, including the Network for Higher Education in Africa. And with that, I think it's important that we see what her thoughts are about this issue of gender and education, as her doctorate focused on that subject matter. So living in Nairobi, how is Nairobi, first of all?
Very nice. Today it's been rainy, but Nairobi is temperate most of the year and always sunny and very green. So they call it the green city under the sun. It's a very nice place to be.
At this time of the year, it's green anyway, right?
Yes, yes.
Dr. Diaw, Dr. Codou, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yes, you are. Codou.
Codou. You are a Senegalese living in Kenya. That should not be important, but I just wanted to mention that so people are aware that you are truly a cosmopolitan global citizen of the world, and you are therefore well versed to talk about Africa in a broader context than just Kenya, right? That's so. Yeah. Think about these SDGs and this gender conversation, and 2030 Each for Equal this year and where we're going. How do you see 2030 shaping up in the African context when it comes to education and girls' education? What is happening that you think might allow us to say we're fairly and squarely on the road to the vision for 2030?
Well, there's a lot to be optimistic for. I think the past couple of decades have seen a lot of progress, leaps actually for some countries in terms of getting young women into the education system, educating them and transitioning them to other levels of education. In the 2000s, I think the momentum was a little, up to the 2000s, the momentum was a little stronger than it is now. But many countries are still on course and are doing the best they can to get more women into, education, but not just any education, education that is empowering, education that opens doors for women, education that enables them to actually, transform their lives. We can speak in terms of numbers, but we can also speak in terms of quality of life. And I think all statistics will show that more women on the African continent are able to parlay, the types of education they receive into more empowering livelihoods, more empowering lifestyles, But, you know, a lot remains to be done.
I want to kind of jump right into this education that's meaningful. I have a paradigm I've been using called my Smart Futures paradigm, where S stands for sustainable systems being put in place. M is meaningful metrics. A is agility and adaptability of the agents that are supposed to be moving the system around. R is robust resilience with all the climate change horrors lying ahead. And T is the transformative use of technology. So we look at smart education with that lens. I know that certainly Kenya was at the forefront of the whole technology adaptation in ICT with finance. How is that translated to the approach to making education more accessible?
Well, Kenya definitely with the M-Pesa creation, you know, which allows people to use mobile money, has really been at the forefront of changing a lot of sectors, including for women. And you know how a lot of women are in the informal sector in African countries. They delve in trade and in, you know, more like family-oriented agriculture. Some, you know, do trade and are able to actually use this tool, whether they're literate or illiterate. They've been able to actually use this tool to access markets and to trade and to, you know, pay for what they buy and what they sell. If you go personally, you know, I see a lot of women who are in the Maasai markets. You may know it, having visited Nairobi in the past. There are Maasai markets where a lot of women do trade, you know, in arts and crafts. And, you know, nowadays, there's no problem, you know, paying those women who are creative, who are, you know, trying to make a better life for themselves using M-Pesa. And it's opened up, I think, access to finance. Not necessarily through credit or what have you, but there are options for microcredit these days with those tools, tools like M-Pesa, or just generally all the types of mobile monies. But what it has done for women is that really allow them to control their own revenues, being able to trade and not have to run after people to, you know, get paid. Being able to, you know, buy and pay on the spot. All of those, I think, you know, are were not necessarily meant for women when M-Pesa was created, but somehow women, rural, urban, anywhere in between, have been able to capture this new technology and make it their own, make it work in the spheres in which, you know, they evolve. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So if we bring that access to a smartphone or a phone, and hopefully smart, even a text-based phone, how might the education sector benefit from this new technology being fairly widely available? Is the education sector, you talk about TechVoc training being something you're trying to push people into. Are there people coming up with ways in which, with this whole new, let's say, miniaturization or microtization of information, right? Are there people in Africa coming up with ways to which we can make micro bits of education available rather than waiting for the traditional schools and traditional universities? How is that conversation being held in Africa? How do we use the same technology to educate people? Is that being held?
As far as I know, I mean, it's at various levels. Technology is looked at as the equalizer, the enabler of access to education for many people, but not for everyone. Let's say if you know, you have the African Virtual University, for example, that's actually headquartered in Kenya. You have a few other, the African Union had another you know, virtual university. I know in Senegal, they started the Virtual Universities of Senegal, where they try to democratize access and take the university to the people rather than the people coming to the university. However, I don't think that translated in democratizing, as in reaching everybody and anybody. The cell phone, there were, you know, in the 1990s and mostly in the 2000s, there was a lot of talk about using the telephone to reach, you know, the unreachable, so that they can get educated. But it gets complicated because, you know, the little cell phone that you have that may not be a smartphone, you know, has its limits. And then you talk about access to, you know, connectivity, literally. Not rural areas still are not the best, you know, connected places on the continent. You talk about the cost of access, you know, puts also a damper on the enthusiasm that was, you know, created around the possibilities, the potential of using, you know, digital technology to reach the unreachable in the education system. It also happens that many of our governments are not necessarily equipped to innovate in that sense. So a lot of the initiatives have been on either by the private sector or you know, by non-profit organizations, and usually at pilot level. I honestly don't know of any currently of any mass use of the cell phone, for example, to really reach, let's say, women for increasing their literacy, or for providing, you know, primary education, for example. There are initiatives that have been undertaken. There is a private education provider called Bridge, which is quite controversial, but Bridge had been using the cell phone to reach people from underserved communities. But it turns out that the model, you know, has been criticized. There are various views about the model. But I don't think just, you know, studying through the cell phone is a viable option right now, as, you know, or an alternative that will stick, only because of the many other issues, including, you know, government readiness and willingness to do that kind of, to take that kind of approach. You know, some others are using virtual reality to teach, let's say, teachers, for example, you know, trained teachers. Yeah. It's all of these are really innovations that are at a microcosm. They're not widespread, and they also require a lot of inputs. You know, capital cost is rather high, and if you're in a country where connectivity is not as strong, then it puts a damper on what is possible. All that being said, doesn't mean that we couldn't continue exploring those avenues as a way of reaching really young women, older women, and young children who are from, you know, disadvantaged background or live in remote rural areas where the offerings are not as diverse, or you know, or don't exist altogether.
Yeah, I understand that. So we have these pilots happening, we have these microcosms of hope, let's say, popping up, but there's still not what we saw the base infrastructure of connectivity and probably power, because I was remembering back in the 60s, coming from Jamaica, that there was an upsurge of, okay, let's use the television to be a way to, you know, teach. A shortage of teachers. Some subjects, let's do them on television, and the classroom or every school will have 4 or 5 televisions, and then these classes can go to these rooms where the televisions were. But then the issue became some rural schools did not have power. So I hear what you're saying, but I do think we might be coming to this sort of a opportunity node where experiments that in microgrid power and solar power and wind power are becoming more common, and more people have sort of the innovative 21st century brain of many people in Africa are open. So I'm thinking that if we see that with more projects like what your foundation is able to do, we might find that somebody from the bottom comes up with a solution. Then the question becomes, how does that scale? Of course, that's always the question, but still, I wanted to
Yeah.
kind of jump into another question area that popped up in my head when I was talking, and this idea of technology, because we already see that this idea of the future of work and AI is a problem in the West or in the global North, right? So, oh, we're going to lose work, what we're going to do. And so, is that conversation happening in Africa at all? Or is like, that's not going to happen right now because governments are not going to go down that road. We're not going to replace people with AI in certain job functions right now because it just doesn't make sense. Where do you see that conversation, or how do you see that conversation taking place?
Well, AI is the new buzzword, and I think the African government, African higher education institutions, and the private sector in Africa have been on the bandwagon, and some are using AI in various ways, enabling communications over the internet. Some are using it as a way of reaching customers in various arenas. I know that in Nigeria there are banks that are using AI to induct their customers into the products that they have, etc. You see on CNN, there's a program there on CNN about avant-garde Africa or something like that. Once in a while, you'll see a new initiative. There's a lot being done in AI. I don't think Africa is maybe at the level of certain continents, but it certainly has not, ignored the potential of using AI to maybe grow the economy. As with any tool, it's not the panacea. It's how you decide to actually use it. What policies do you put in place so that it's not used in an adverse manner, in a manner that will not benefit people? How would you use it? What policies do you put in place so that AI is not a tool for control of populations, for example? We know that on the internet, half of the programs, information programs are now, AI facilitated. We know that, actually the penetration rate for cell phones and digital devices in Africa is quite high. I think it has also the most potential for growth compared to other continents because, new products that are more affordable are being created to enable, people who don't have a lot of means, but who would like to have digital tools to obtain them. So all of that, I think, is creating the conditions for, governments and the private sector and non-profit sector and all kinds of other sectors to really use AI to the benefit of the continent, of the economies, of the population, as a tool for gathering large amounts of data and analyzing them and maybe identifying where actions can be taken. So I look at AI as a tool, and I know that it's on the radar of the African Union. I know that it's on the radar of many higher education institutions. I know that some of the funding partners in some African countries are also looking to introduce it. The whole thing is whether the regulatory framework in the country is conducive to the good use of AI, because it can actually help Africa leap, in certain areas. And, we talk about the future of work, whether young people are actually equipped to actually, kind of benefit from it and contribute to its growth. We talk about how, it's being talked about. I'm not sure how realistic it is, but certainly we're talking about, the way young people are what they are learning currently may be obsolete in 10, 15 years, likely, but also there are certain types of knowledge that are necessary. AI is a tool. It can augment, enable, or it can destroy. but how, the populations themselves, how the countries, how the states and governments and the private sector decide to apply it on the continent will make all the difference. And I think that's where, we tend to think about things in pragmatic ways, but I think the policy work needs to be done, a regulatory framework put in place, and not at the level of each country, but more at the continental level, so that it can help guide how the continent can actually benefit from AI, and to not leave women behind, how, more women can also be equipped and specialized in these areas, so that they can bring another mode of thinking of digital tools and technology, and how to use it for the betterment of society and of populations.
Yes, we're talking about then women and technology. How is that shaping up in terms of, let's say, at the tertiary level in the engineering schools? I know that a couple years ago, a Nigerian woman became the head of the section for the World Federation of Engineering, the women's section of the World Federation of Engineering. And we had a chat and we talked about possibly what could happen with African women in engineering. I'm not sure how far that has moved. Have you come across any, let's say, more hasting, I'm an engineer, so I'm asking, have you come across any more hasting and intentional, let's say, steps to deepen, strengthen, broaden the pipeline of girls in schools going into the engineering and STEM fields? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's an upswing towards that. It may not be as, much of a critical mass yet, but I think, a gendered approach to STEAM, I would call it, science, technology, engineering, agriculture these days is added, and mathematics. We see that more and more institutions are paying attention to the exclusionary, picture that we know of that has existed in the past, and that they're trying to bring in more young women into the field, and also that more, private sector industries are also, being aware of the need to diversify their workforce, and also putting programs in place that can not only help young women choose those fields, but also stay in them, because sometimes they're not the most welcoming fields for, women who have children and have, all kinds of other demands on them as individuals, and who also have this drive and ambition to have a career in those, fields. But I think most governments will agree that you can't lose, the brain power of the majority of your population, and that whether they have programs, that are, sustainable or not, I think many have put some thought to, enabling more young women to enter these fields, and also, with the work of NGOs raising awareness, with the work of leadership institutes and academies, showing young women that they actually are able to do these things, and also raising the awareness of teachers in terms of gendered, understanding the gender dynamics that are preventing young women from entering these fields. So much is being done. I guess the challenge is being able to identify what is being done, being able to make the connections, and organize it in a manner that will show the cumulative impact of all the, individual isolated initiatives. I used to work for the Forum. Yeah, I used to work for the Forum for African Women Educationalists, FAWE, and FAWE had a STEM program, and they also put in place a gender responsive pedagogy approach, that they actually train teachers both within teacher training institutions and while they're in service, to understand how, having a gendered lens to pedagogy, to teaching, to organizing your classroom can actually enable that. I remember working for the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, where we had a program called SMASE, where, it was also equipping math and science teachers to teach differently. So that, and then having, an eye to retaining young girls who show promise rather than discouraging. So a lot is being done, and I don't think these issues are specific to Africa. They're all over the world. Yeah. And, but with advocacy, with programming, with policy changes and funding also, because, it requires a lot of financial input to change programs and change training approaches, etc. I think all of that is paying off. Maybe we're not seeing all of it together, but there needs to be also the work of kind of making, how can I put it? If we could work on gathering the good practices, documenting them, disseminating them, and showing that, when you put intention and resources and expertise behind this, things actually do work. It may take a little bit of time, but I think it's necessary.
I think the bandwidth is going to be giving up on us soon. I just have two or three more questions. You talk about intentions and resources. So let's come to the intentions question. A lot of African women authors are doing very well right now in the marketplace of science fiction or futuristic fiction. So some of it is really far out, is magical stuff.
Realism.
Yeah. But do you think that with AU 2060, 3 or 2067, forget what the number is, but 2060 plus being like something that the AU is talking about, are you seeing anybody writing with that year in mind to sort of help us out picture what that future might look like in a real plausible way that helps ignite imagination? Is that happening?
Well, if you notice, almost every African country now has a vision 20-something, right?
Yes.
Some are 2030, some are 2020, 65, some are. So I assume, besides the, kind of the fashion of, copying each other,
no, but
there is some substance to it.
Yeah, but that's not it, because I was in Ghana last year and I actually spoke. And when I spoke, I'm a futurist, so I speak about the future. So when I started talking about Ghana 2057 and describing the city, it was an engineering conference, but I was like, oh, we hadn't thought about that. And they don't even pay attention. So I'm wondering if in the literature world, if you're seeing everybody writing stories that's about that time, which is what, 47 years from now. So the young people who are in college now are going to certainly be in their 60s and 70s in that time. Do you find any writers writing for young adults about that era that will allow that sort of a intention and fomentions? Because we could write, every government has a vision, something, and I'm a critic of some of this. I mean, I love it because I'm a futurist. I love it. I'm a critic in the sense that it's kind of an on-the-shelf policy, and it's not what I say. It's not disseminated at the community level, because national must be local and local must be national at the same time. So I really am a fan of trying to see more people taking these policies and visions off the shelf and implementing them in a way that everybody sees themselves in the picture of this future vision. So that's why I'm even doing this conversation, because I'm thinking, well, maybe somebody will hear this conversation who hadn't thought about this before. I'm saying, I really could be doing something different if I want my child or my grandchild, or if I myself as a young person want to create this differently. So
Yeah.
you see, I haven't read all of these authors, and certainly the short pieces I've looked at in magazines or gone through in the bookstore and actually tried to sneak a few pages up.
Mm.
And I certainly don't read any book that doesn't end well. That's my first rule. If it's too like dark, I can't read it because I get depressed. But are you seeing any what I call plausible? I'm not sure if you even read this kind of stories, But have you
No, I
heard?
don't, but I hear about them.
Have you heard about Evelyn? Have you heard about
Yeah,
any,
yeah.
which are what I call?
There's a new genre. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Have you heard about
there's
any?
a new genre burgeoning in among young African writers, and I think I mean it's not even when you talk about Ben Okri, for example, started already from Nigeria, and there were a couple of I forget the names, but there were a couple of writers who were known to kind of project outside
Yeah.
of the dire realities of the African continent, as we know them right now. But I think it shows, it opens up minds and shows the possibilities of and the vision of young people. And I can't say that I'm very knowledgeable about this area. I'm not quite a science fiction or a futurist in that way in terms of fiction. But I think we can only salute and encourage that wave,
Definitely.
because, as you say, it will show what is possible beyond the now.
Exactly.
And it also, the more successful young people who delve into that are, the more it will attract others to try their hand at it. And so it also creates a whole new wave, a movement, a way of doing and being and thinking. But I know if frequenting young people, that a lot of them are, very future oriented, in Africa. In my work, current work, I engage a lot with, young people we support through scholarships, etc. But not just scholarship, through leadership training, through visioning, through creating enterprise. And I tell you, 22-year-olds of this today who get the support they need are very different from the 22-year-old I was, and very different from before. So it's encouraging.
And
You
the
go and you
I
interact with them. Exactly. You interact with them and you're like, wow, there's something to this. I need to continue this work. Because it's opening up doors and minds, and even their own aspirations. You get somebody, a young person from a village, a remote village, who really never allowed themselves to think that they could go to the university. You provide them with everything that they need, and beyond what their wildest dream, beyond what people who come from upper middle class families receive, and you shape them along the way, and in 3-4 years you see that result, and you're like, wow, it is possible. So I think also putting the means behind our aspirations and young people's aspirations will make all the difference. And when I say means, I don't mean just money. I mean, a new way of thinking and doing. Exactly.
Intellectual capital, mental capital, relationship capital.
Yeah.
What keeps you up at night as you see the work that you've been tasked to do? You see the challenges things that have been tried. You've been with several places, and I can see you're passionate about your work. So you really want to know, I'm sure, that when 2030 rolls around, you can say, aha, but for me, this would not have happened. And take on your shoulder to yourself. But what keeps you up at night when you think about, well, if I don't get this right, this may not happen? What keeps you up at night?
Well, many things, but I think mostly failing young people. It could be in many ways, but not putting our words, where our money, where our mouths are. I don't know how to say that, but backing up what we want, what we say we would do, and where we say we would support them, and making sure that young people who are, even those who don't have access to education, that they see a future for themselves. that they develop their creativity, that they develop their brain and their hands, that endures the test of time. Those are the things, that you think about, and you say, am I doing it the right way?
Yeah.
Are we doing enough of it? How we is how the much, the extent to which we're doing it, is it right? And you know that the more you reach, the more there are to reach.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
limitation of means, of resources, of your ability to just reach all of them, knowing full well that you're one little drop in
Yes.
the ocean of
Yes.
good intentions and actions
Yes.
that are being taken. Those are the things that you try to reflect about and see how best to do them,
Yeah.
or how better to do them.
As I'm hearing you, I'm saying, Jeff, where are you? CODOU and I need, like, 10 million of your $1 billion pledge. We're here. We want to create our woman in science, African woman in science and technology, engineering, and agriculture have a STEAM. It's relevant to climate change, Jeff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not here speaking on behalf of the foundation. This is a very personal endeavor, but I can tell you that the foundation has a 70% target for young women. Like anything we do, it must benefit 70% of young women. The entrepreneurship work that we do must benefit 70% of young women. We are thinking about, young people who are not the typical, targets, as in young people who have disabilities, young people who come from refugee backgrounds or displaced background. So that makes me really happy that this particular foundation, with a lot of means, is actually going not for the easy targets, but for the more difficult targets. Yes. We actually get the backlash sometimes of, but what about boys and young men? We're not saying no boys or young men, but we need to somehow bring things to a certain level. We have equity in mind here, and we have, a sense of fairness in the whole process. And when we work with universities all across the globe, we actually try to encourage them to, channel these young people into STEAM fields. We have specific partnerships with organizations that are promoting agriculture science and higher education, agricultural higher education on the continent. So really trying to pay attention to those things that are not necessarily the easiest to tackle.
But food security is critical, and climate change will affect food security. So, and people have to eat, and women traditionally in Africa have been responsible for going to the field. So therefore, it's a logical extension.
Yeah. So we haven't forgotten. We're not lost on that. We really favor more young women into these fields. We really favor more young women creating their own businesses, more older women mentoring them, more banks opening credits to young women. You have the gender thing, you have the age thing, you have the socioeconomic background, all of them coalescing to make the likelihood of a woman creating a business and sticking to it a lot harder. Then you have all societal and cultural attitudes, etc., that actually compound all of that. So we're investing in the areas we feel will be, levers and screwdrivers to open up more spaces for women.
Wonderful. So as we draw to a close, and this idea about being intentional and shaping things and unlocking things and leveraging things, and you think about the story that we're creating now and the story that you want to see, I want you to jump into 2030 with both feet and with eyes closed and just, fly into the future and land and open your eyes and read the headline that you would like to see as an optimistic person. Because I know you're optimistic. You already said you're optimistic, so I don't have to ask you that. What is the headline you would like to see?
Wow, a headline.
In 2030, you are there and you're reading it.
It's only 10 years from now, by the way.
I know.
It's not that far.
Exactly, it's not that far, but you have to be realistic. What will you see?
You know how Barack Obama used to say, yes, we can?
Yes.
I would say, yes, we have, you know, but, with a little bit of, how can I say it, caution, you know, that all the myriad of, you know, circular work that is being done to get us there will actually get us there. If not with both feet, at least with one foot in, and that we can sort out the next decade how we can get there.
The next foot for the next decade. I like that.
Exactly.
Yes, we have entered into the final target space. We didn't quite make the actual target, but we're now only so many, you know, inches from here away from the target to here.
Yeah.
So yes, we have.
Yeah, like I said, the first step, you know, will take 1,000 miles.
And the first foot is
but the future is now.
This is so good. Thank you so much, Dr. Codou Diaw, for joining us. Dr. Diaw is in her professional life, is with the Mastercard Foundation, doing work across Africa in supporting initiatives to drive girls and young women into employment, making that transition into entrepreneurship and into tech block training. And we just are really happy that we had a chance to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And it's been a very enjoyable conversation. Until next time.
Until next time. So thank you everyone for joining us. And we are so happy that you stay with us on Future Sense Now, where we explore salient ideas for sustainable futures. We have come to the end of this conversation, but the story continues being written by all of us. So remember, it is better for us to be the parent of our future than the child of our past. And as we say in Jamaica, walk good, safe journeys.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you for listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson. Future Sense Now is produced by the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Remember, our futures are embedded in the landscape of our present stories. Seize the day, share this story, and share the future.